Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us wherever you are in the world. I know you are from all continents for this deep dive into the race for the White House with AFP. My name's David Eades. I'm going to be moderating our experts here, the heart of the team at AFP who are in charge of this extraordinary moment, yet another extraordinary US election in this year of, well, they call it a super year of elections, but I think this really obviously is the single most significant one. And to address the way in which AFP is covering it, I'm delighted to be joined by Giles Hewitt, who's the AFP Editor-in-Chief, North America. Giles, good to see you. Along with Salima Belhadj, who's the video editor in North America, and Pedro Ugarte, who is photo editor-in-chief. Welcome to all of you. I've got to say, just to start with, a couple of points for everyone who's joining us. If you've got questions in the course of this 1 hour webinar, please do submit them. Put them in through the chat if you want to understand better certain aspects of the way in which AFP is working and pulling this amazing story together. Whatever those questions might be, put them in the chat and we'll do what we can to get around as many of them as possible. Secondly, you may want to activate the subtitles that Teams offers. It may be something that helps in terms of the sound quality you have in any case, but please do that. We'll leave that to you to decide. While you're working those elements out, I'm going to turn first to you, Giles. I just wonder how you've been feeling over the course of this year from what looked like, well, I would never say it was going to be a straightforward sort of story, but you probably had an idea as to where this story was going until kaboom, everything changed.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for doing this with us, first of all. Yeah, it's funny to look back because we started planning this well over a year ago. And I remember we were discussing amongst ourselves at the times and with the rest of the newsroom that there was really this concern that it might be a challenge to sustain interest in the campaign, because at that time, if you remember, that the candidates were effectively chosen well in advance. The primary elections were something of a formality, I think. And we didn't just have two old men, but we had the same two old men who had fought the previous election. So that's where we started from. We were wondering how that was going to go. And now when we see where we are with the first ever former president to become a convicted felon and run back for the White House, the assassination attempt, at least one, an unprecedented implosion of a major party nominee and his replacement with the first ever black woman party nominee. Just precedent after precedent, I think, that has been broken. And all that against the background of two major conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, both of which the US is a major player, if not a direct combatant. So yes, all of that makes this, I think, probably one of the most consequential US elections probably in history, and with major implications, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world.
Absolutely, which is, I'm sure, why so many people from around the world are actually keen to know how this is going. Salima, I wanted to sort of put the same thing to you, actually. Salima Belhadj, you've got the responsibilities for all the video gathering going on. I mean, how do you sustain? It's almost like a new adrenaline hit every day, even again today, that the news is just not standard news.
Yes, thanks, David. So yeah, we're trying to cope with everything that's happening all at once. As Giles was mentioned, I think in March or April when we were filing, the credential request for the convention, we were like, oh, should we send 1 or 2 VJ? Will that be that of interest? And then hopefully we went with a full team, and we did right, because the Republican convention started right after the first assassination attempt of Trump, and we were happy that it was actually the main news the following week. So we were happy that we were there. And since then, we are just trying to cover as much as possible. We have 3 people to cover, actually. We have the actual president and Kamala Harris as a VP and a candidate, and President Trump that is always on top of news. So we are using our team across the country to be able to cover everything.
Pedro, it's actually suddenly very picture rich as well, isn't it? I mean, we just heard Giles talking about two old men fighting it out. That seemed to be the image, and men in grey suits is one thing. Everything has changed.
Yes, indeed. I mean, everything has changed, as you know, as both Giles and Salima mentioned already. I think in our case as well, I mean, a part of this, as we say, this adrenaline push that we had in the last time has been, well, it has really stretched our resources to the maximum, right? I mean, I think Salima well mentioned we were supposed to cover 2 people. Now we have to focus on 3 main characters and full time. A part of that, we have to also look for, the interesting stories that basically can give us a glimpse and a good idea of what are the matters that really, matter on this election.
And I think that, in a sense, sort of that speaks very much to what AFP can offer, Giles. And everyone's going to be stretched, and you cannot have someone everywhere. But the importance, therefore, of a network of stringers, of making sure, let's take an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You've got to cover that, and you have stringers who are in a position to work directly with you, along with important media partners.
Yeah, I think if we take the assassination attempt, for example, interestingly enough, we don't send a text reporter to every single rally. We generally pick and choose. Sometimes we use a stringer, but we cover most of them, but not every one. And I remember that the one that was on July the 13th in Butler in Pennsylvania, we sent one of our top writers from New York. The reason was we had decided we needed a reportage on the anatomy of a Trump rally. We wanted to do a story about the music and the merchandise that was on offer, and just sort of paint a picture for how a Trump rally goes down. And so we sent this reporter from New York, and then we suddenly got a phone call, and he just said, "I'm okay. Shots have been fired," and then we were off to the races, immediately. And what turned out was a light mission really became a major breaking story, and it happened on a Saturday, so. We had lighter staffing. Normally on the weekends, we had about half a dozen people in the newsroom at that time. An hour later, we had about 30 people. But I think, this is the sort of story that a news agency like AFP is for. Over the years, we've expanded and sort of diversified the content that we produce. We do a lot of stuff now. But the bottom line, fundamentally, is that we are a breaking news agency. And it's this kind of major, totally unexpected breaking news that our clients are going to measure us against when it happens, and how we perform. And happily, that time we were able to step up.
Yeah, breaking news agency, but also multimedia agency, which is an important point, Salima, particularly in terms of this assassination story.
Yes, so on this day, we actually benefit of our partnership with the US network CBS. So we were live actually on the rally through CBS, and also what we call the DC pool that follow every former president or current president. And so we were live when the shot happened. And then also we benefit from the instinct of our photographer and text reporter, because on site, the text reporter actually just took his mobile phone and started filming what was happening around him. And thanks to that, we were able to have the first video on the wire. And this is something also that is very rooted in AFP, that all the media and all the support, we always work together. So, and mobile phone, every reporter has a mobile phone, even though you are not doing video. So that was also what allows us to be able to give video to the client pretty quickly.
That, Pedro, that flexibility and agility is something which I suppose many clients would take for granted, possibly, but it also applies to stills photographers as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what happens, for example, on this case, as Giles mentioned before, we don't have, we don't have all the resources to put people every single time in every single place, right? That rally event in Butler was supposed to be another one. At the time, we assigned a photographer, a stringer photographer who worked for us in Pittsburgh, and she was taking pictures from the racer, from the photo racer. I remember at the time we were even taking care of things at the Democratic Convention. Our team of us was there when the news break, and of course we just kicked out into full action. We contacted Rebecca. We made sure that she was fine, and as soon as she could, she started sending pictures. So yeah, it's as we mentioned before. I mean, we are basically a breaking news agency, right? That's the core of our business, and we just get into action as soon as we could on that.
I mean, by its very nature, that means you're all, to a degree, you're adrenaline junkies, because that is what breaking news does to you, isn't it? But Giles,
If
I
I
think
could
this is
just add one
Yeah,
one thing
please.
there, just because it's interesting, I think that one of the advantages we do have is that because we were a relatively late newcomer to video in some ways compared to some other agencies, but the good thing was that when we started, it was already digital, and we integrated it immediately into our newsroom. And that, as Salima mentioned, we started that culture where everybody had, at the beginning, we were trying to just grow the amount of content we could produce. So everyone got involved. That included photographers, that included text people. And we were taught how to basically a few 5 do's and don'ts about shooting video on a smartphone, for example. The photographers were obviously much more sophisticated than some of the text people were. But it's stayed with us, I think. And so when there is an incident like that, which just comes out of nowhere, one of the first things people do is just reach for the smartphone and realize that is a very important thing that they have to do. And it is a great benefit to us.
Yeah.
And I think it goes, sorry,
Please do.
but
No,
I think
go,
it
Pedro.
also goes the other way around, right? Sometimes we have very talented DJs, for example,
Absolutely.
taking photography. We have photographers, as mentioned, Giles, taking
And
video.
providing text for us.
And of course, yes, providing a lot of
We're
time.
all together.
Look
But
at
it's
you,
true.
you're
I
all
think there is
stars.
a very, ingrained multimedia culture in general in all of
But I think that's an important point, isn't it? Because I mean, multimedia is one word. It's almost intermedia too, isn't it? That you are all expected to have those skills now and bring them to the table. And I think you've given us a couple of very good examples as to how that works. But I was going to say this idea of you all as adrenaline junkies is one thing, but you have a job to do in a much broader, bigger picture as well, Giles, don't you? I think you were just alluding to the planning quite some time ago as to how you were going to bring out the stories of real Americans and how they felt about their country, the key issues surrounding them, what bothered them, and taking it beyond Washington and beyond Wall Street, for example.
Yes, I think our priority from the start was to provide a clear, balanced, visually rich portrait of where the country stands, really, and where it stands in relation to the choices that the election offers. You have to find creative, engaging ways to explore the main issues, which are things like cost of living, immigration, reproductive rights, and especially wherever possible, you have to give them a human face and a human voice, I think. And it's not a problem so much, but like many, I think, non-US media who have a significant presence in the United States, our main headquarters or our main offices are, for us, in Washington, D.C., New York, and Los Angeles. We do have other bureaus, we're spread out a bit, but those are the 3 main ones. And those are, of course, all uber liberal cities. They really are not representative of the US electorate in any way, shape, or form. So the challenge has always been to deploy the resources we do have widely and effectively and speak to different people, young and old people, rural, urban, Latino, African American. You have to really make an effort, I think, to get out there. And as you say, get beyond the Beltway, get beyond Washington, get beyond the East Coast and West Coast, and get into the sort of heartland. So it was an obvious choice, really, in a way, because in a way the election made it for us. There were these 7 clear battleground states which were going to end up deciding the election: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And so what we did in the end was we've done lots of missions to all of these states, but at one point we also decided to do a specific project where we selected one county in each of these swing states, and we selected it because we felt it had a certain story to tell. It might be a county which was predominantly evangelicals, who supported Trump, for example, and there were other places we chose. And we sent a multimedia mission there, so text, photo, and video, to do a sort of in-depth report on a particular issue that we could broaden because it was an issue of national interest, again, sort of reproductive rights, inflation, stuff like that. And in each place, we also we spoke to a lot of people, but we found 5 people in each county that we asked to speak to camera and to answer 2 basic questions. And we asked the same questions in each place, which was, what is the most important issue for you in this election? And what is your biggest concern about the future of the country? And we put those all together in an overarching story afterwards, and also in a nice YouTube video. And I think that's the way we tried to, I suppose, give that wider picture and try and inform people outside the United States of what goes on, because the language between the campaigns is so heated and so high that sometimes you forget that there are a lot of people there who are, there are Trump supporters who are pretty moderate people. There might be single issue voters who are going, and you need to speak to them. I think we learned a lot from 2016 when Trump won very unexpectedly, and I think the media got a bit of a wake-up call that perhaps they've been a bit apathetic about.
Missing the boat a little bit in terms of where the story and the votes actually lay. But I guess for both Salima, for you, and Pedro, for you as well, there's a huge appeal, isn't there, as well, to getting out of. I mean, if you have a choice between putting a camera outside a courtroom for weeks on end, or getting out into the thick of it, into one of the swing states, it's a far more creative world and a more creative story that you can offer.
Yeah, totally. So as Giles mentioned, we also organized the coverage of this particular mission in the battleground state in video, and we actually decided on different format when we had the people answering facing camera to have a more impactful video that we have published in our digital platform. But as you said, the challenge is also that in video, particularly all day long, we need to cover people in suit with the president, the vice president, and we don't get to know, to hear more the American citizen, American voters. So taking the time to settle those missions and knowing that we will be able to provide quotes and everything also for the client, as we are going to do it ahead of the election. We are back to those battleground states to be able to have quotes and to know more about them closer to the election day. That is also very important, and we try to organize time around that.
And that provides a continuity, of course, in terms of the story that you can offer to clients who want to get that sense as to where things are moving. Pedro, I was going to leave this till a little bit later, but maybe we should get into it now. As we're talking about creativity.
Well, okay,
yeah.
go ahead.
Go on.
I think it was related because, no, my point was like, of course, our main part in the photo is to cover the candidates, right? I mean, we have to get that right. There is no question about that. And we have to do it well. And as you well mentioned before, I mean, photographing these politicians in these very stage organized, environments is in itself a big challenge. We still have to make sure that we make those pictures interesting to the public. And in order to do that, well, we come with, incredibly skillful photographers who are really experienced in covering politics, right? They have basically the technical skills, the creativity, and the understanding of the context that will make those pictures interesting, right? I mean, you need to find those candid moments, which basically will allow the people to relate to those candidates. So that's one thing, right? So we need to make that right, and we need to get those pictures as interesting as possible. And on the other hand, we have all the human stories related to the big electoral issues, right? Immigration, abortion, education, economy, etc. And that's when we can deploy other type of photographers with other type of skills to also look for interesting stories and just try to give a window into what's the life of these people and how these big issues affects them. So I think it goes hand by hand. It's all related not only to what you are photographing, but how you are photographing and with whom you are photographing those stories.
And I think that, that this is what really intrigued me, that you are bringing in for the election, and you have done at various stages, you're bringing in, I mean, it's almost like foreign correspondent photographers. So bringing them from other countries to come in and treat it in a slightly different way. So it's not all that granular Americanism. It's also, what do people make of this world from outside? And I think that's an interesting perspective. Why have you done that?
Well, that's the idea, right? I mean, just to bring a little bit of a fresh, different perspective to the coverage. How a foreigner from, for example, Asia or Latin America can look at the issues that are at stake here. I think also that the access that they can have or the approach that they can have to story is different, and the other way around, right? I mean, when a photographer from here goes abroad, he has a completely different view, and I think that speaks to how important is the global network that we have, and how we can benefit from all those different skills and all those different points of view when it comes to speaking about these type of stories.
And it is the story that, I mean, there is no end to the appetite for it, Giles, is there? It's obviously, and as each, I think we're about 3 weeks now, 21 days or something, the countdown. We're not that far away. But I did also want to ask, so we mentioned early on the first assassination attempt, and that took a lot of the wind out of the sails of the Kamala Harris story. How do you focus on that as a story in any case? Because people need to know, who is the new candidate? Americans need to know, what policies does she really stand for, etc. And do you put together analysis pieces? Will you do opinion pieces? I mean, how far do you go?
We don't do opinion pieces in the sense that some mainstream newspapers would do. For example, we don't have an AFP opinion piece. We do a lot of analysis. So essentially it's about talking to analysts, talking to experts, talking to people inside the political field, and then putting that together in that way. AFP does not speak with an editorial voice. At least we're not meant to, and we try not to. So we use other people basically to guide us and to give us a consensus as well. And we approach that from many different angles. I think with Kamala Harris, to be honest, she galvanized the campaign after Biden dropped out. The interesting thing about that was that the assassination, I think, was such a huge story, but was then rather quickly replaced by Biden's withdrawal. That's what took over the news at that time, and we'd have been Trump for a week. Almost this extraordinary thing, and the fallout from it. And then suddenly Biden was out. It was pretty clear pretty early on who was going to be the replacement, and we were going to have a historic replacement in that way. And we shifted gear immediately, as did everyone else in the media. And that's an extraordinary thing to look back on, how quickly, in a way, although it's come back recently, the assassination was almost overshadowed. Fast.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I mean, the assassination attempt, there's been another one since, and there's been another suspicion of a potential issue after that as well. I mean, it just goes on and on, doesn't it? Salima, what about the terms of the way in which you're going to actually address some of these issues? We're talking about analysis there, but also we might talk about issues of impartiality. And now I appreciate that that's not necessarily your role. You feed material to a client, but you've got to be seen to be measured, haven't you? And be given, I guess, do you give literally equal time to candidates? How does it work?
We don't count the time. I mean, we don't count we edit 30 seconds of Trump, we're going to edit 30 seconds of Harris. This is not how we work. But we are trying to do is that we rotate the editors that are going to edit, like, for example, Trump, because sometimes Trump always keep on repeating the same things. And if you keep the same editor editing Trump's speeches, sometimes it will get a sense of being bored and not editing the quote because, oh, he said it before. But sometimes, even if he said it before, one day it will have more impact than another. So we are trying to move the things around within the team to be able to always have a broad view of what he is saying. I focus on Trump because he speaks a lot, he's always there. When Kamala Harris, it's always more easy to edit because each of her rally has a particular theme. So it's just, and she's new in the scene since recently, so it's more easy to edit. But no, in terms of timing or counting the seconds, we don't do that.
You've got a conventional candidate and an unconventional candidate, I guess, is one way of looking at it. And you know, one is he is just a renter quote. Everything he says seems to be repeatable for good or ill, whatever it might be. So I can see where. Also,
just to finish my point, sorry, it's just that we give as much material that we can to the client, and then we know that it's up to the client to then maybe have like a balanced package or anything, but we give more than that can be used.
Pedro, I guess the same applies for stills, doesn't it? You've got to make sure. Again, this is a world where, you know, what one picture at one moment of one candidate can give a very perhaps misleading or very sort of tilted view as to what state they're in. They suddenly look exhausted, or they've, you know, caught on the hop.
Right. I mean, I think, well, in our case, I think the way in which we try to keep this balance is by allocating the same amount of resources to the coverage of both candidates. I think that's quite important. I mean, it's, as we mentioned before, is, you know, we have to put a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of resources to keep covering both. So we are, I mean, as much as we can, we just allocate the same amount of resources on one hand. On the other, I think it's important to have like that we make sure that we have a fair and balanced representation on both. That doesn't mean that we are not looking after those candid moments that I mentioned before, right? I mean, I think those are the key of our coverage, and those candid moments can come in the form of, you know, a laugh. They can come in the form of, you know, a serious look. They can come in many different forms. We cannot start censoring the kind of picture that we are giving to our clients. Let's remember that we are not publishers, but we submit content to our clients, and they are the ones who decide. But we have to be as, you know, as much as fair and balanced in the representation of basically of what we are offering, and I think that's the way we approach it. Yeah,
I understand that, Giles. I might just add to that though. You obviously, it's up to the client to then work out what to use, but you do have a responsibility as well, don't you, in terms of fact checking? I mean, you know, things can be said. How true are they? How, you know, how fair are they? I guess that's an important part of your business.
Yes, we have a very large fact-checking operation, which we've had for a number of years now, and they're very experienced. I think the important thing here is that Donald Trump is certainly an unconventional candidate. I think the danger is sometimes that he can suck all the media oxygen out of the room if we're not careful. That's why I think what Pedro and Salima are quite right about. You know, you have to allocate the same resources to the coverage, and then be careful about how much actually product comes out. I mean, what we do is that we have to report what Trump says, but we have to do it factually, dispassionately, and above all, just with context. And I think that's where in the daily coverage, the fact-checking comes. We would report some of the more extreme things he says from time to time, and then there will be a paragraph immediately after that explaining what the reality is. You know, we're not there to have a real-time argument with any candidate, but we have to contextualize it, and we do have the facts at hand when there are figures about inflation or immigration that we know to be the official figures, and we will put them in. But the question is really one of, I think, of tone in terms of the text. I think when Trump first came on the scene politically, when he was running for president the first time, when he became president, the initial problem with tone was people sometimes were quite honestly quite mocking, I think, in the way they wrote about him. And then they began to take it a bit more seriously. And now, perhaps, there's more real, genuine concern, and sometimes amongst some voters, a fear of some of the things he says. He's become very extreme in some of the rhetoric that comes out. And the problem there is that, like I say, we don't provide opinion ourselves, and we must ensure that the voice of our reporters, whatever they might feel about this, doesn't come through. We put it in the mouths of others. So what we do is we supplement our daily campaign news with angled stories that use analysts ready to unpick what he says and to hopefully show how the message is evolving. But just very quickly on the actual digital verification team, for example, they went through what they can do, and what they're very skilled at is they went through every single Trump post on his Truth Social network for the past 2 months and just did an analysis of it and showed how his language was evolving. How it was actually becoming more, in some cases, much more aggressive and more personalized, and we can do that empirically, and we have data on that, and it's beyond Trump as well. Our data journalists downloaded months of transcripts of Sunday talk shows, dozens and hours of it, and did a linguistic analysis just to show how Republicans and Democrats had changed their language ever since Harris entered the race. So we can do that.
Interesting. Look, we're 3 weeks away, as I said just a moment ago. So let's just cast ourselves forward a little bit, Salima, if we can, to those key battlegrounds again. How will you be covering it in video terms, in staffing levels? What are you going to be doing?
We are going to be in all 7 battleground states. This is where we are going to start our live coverage when the polls open in the East Coast to when the polls close on the West Coast. So it will be Arizona, Nevada, all the list that Giles mentioned earlier. And we're going to have 2 videographers per state. It allows us to be continuously live and also to have 1 videographer focused on gathering quotes and like roaming around the city and trying to provide stories and illustration in addition to the election itself. And also we will be able actually to provide also early footage of ballot counting, because you know that in the US people are currently voting via ballot, and the counting of those ballots will start on the election day, so that on the morning of election day there will be also vote counting. So we will be able to provide all that in all battleground states plus Florida, because Trump is going to vote in Mar-a-Lago. It's his residence, and we think it has to be confirmed that Kamala Harris will be in her HQ in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, so we'll be there as well.
And Pedro, the whole issue of voting, ballot counting, I mean, it's come into its own, hasn't it, in the course of the last election and a bit. So I guess for you also, that getting the right shot at the right time is going to be so important to reflect what, for many people, we'll see as perhaps the single most intriguing aspect of this whole election, maybe even more than the result itself, is, what is the response going to be, and what sort of image are they going to be putting out over ballot counting, over the voting system?
And that's a big challenge, right? Because we don't know which will be the actual story on that day and where it's going to be. So in that sense, we need to be ready to just allocate or to be present almost everywhere in the country. We try, of course, we don't have people just absolutely everywhere, but we are focusing on the main battleground states, certainly. We will have people we're activating our very vast network of stringers in different places, even if they are not the main states. And we are making sure that everybody is either equipped with the latest equipment, so we can receive pictures as soon as possible, transmitted directly from the cameras. And of course, or they are briefed with their own equipment on how to do and how to basically send us, and transmit pictures as soon as possible. At the same time, we have the photo desk, which is basically made out of 7 editors, and will be fully staffed from the morning to the night, and probably all that week will be quite, exhausting for everyone. But that's the challenge in such big, vast geographical, country.
And as the results come in, how do you cover these results coming in, and ultimately, how do you call it? I mean, there is maybe you don't call it, but I mean, how do you monitor how it's called? Let's put it that way.
We have what we call we'll set up a results cell which is led by somebody who's done 5 previous elections, and she runs a team of about 5 journalists whose their only job from the start of the end of voting is to monitor. We use the US networks, and our basic method is we require 2 networks to call a state, and then we will call it based on the US networks. That's always worked for us very well. Generally, they're very, very fast and they're very good. But as you know, there are issues sometimes. The actual result we flash. Again, we will wait for 2 networks to decide that a winner has been announced. The thing with this one, of course, is that when we're planning all of this, we're planning putting teams in place, and working out our schedules. It's incredibly difficult because we know that for sure, almost certainly, it's not going to be decided on election night, and it might well not be decided for days, weeks, and potentially, even longer after that. And that's a very difficult contingency to plan for. We expect to be working 24 hours, certainly for the first 3 days. I mean, that's we've planned already, and we've rotated people into that. But there's a good chance we would have to expand that. Salima mentioned that we are sending text, photo, and video to all the battleground states. Those people will have to remain in place until those states get called. And there's a good chance that if one of them becomes the particular flashpoint, like Pedro mentioned, let's say Georgia, we'll just start reallocating our resources to that place, because that will become always a 24-hour operation as the contestant comes in. It's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, but you used the word contingency there, and it does make, I mean, and it's an open discussion, isn't it, about what is going to happen after this election,
Yes.
particularly if the result goes a certain way. There are huge potentials and tensions around. I imagine as an extensive news agency, you are prepared for that, you cater for it.
Yes, I think that's it. It's not just when the result comes, it's will it be accepted or not? And that's where the real question lies. What we've done is we understand how that could go. There are worst case scenarios where there could it's either a court case, as there was, I guess, with Bush Gore, and it all goes through legal situations, or it ends up on the streets, as it did in January the 6th. And that's a difficult situation for our journalists, especially the ones in the field. So we've had to look into that. We've run security workshops, hostile environment workshops, that we've reminded people what it's like when they're in large crowds, how they have to look for exit routes, interaction with law enforcement, how that should go. And we've had to provide equipment and make sure that people have access to riot equipment should things really become pear-shaped. I mean, fingers crossed that's not going to happen. But it's extraordinary that it's a contingency that we have to seriously plan for and look into. Yes.
And Salima, Pedro, it obviously goes for your teams, your crews in exactly the same way. And that those days of managing to say it's a wrap after the results they've gone, haven't they?
Yeah, that's a lesson learned also from the 2020 election, when the focus were all in Pennsylvania. We have to reinforce the team because one VJ was not able to, stand 24 hours awake while waiting for the results. So that's why we are teaming 2 people in video. It's also for security, not to be isolated. Of course, we also, along with the text and photo colleagues, and also for the mental support, and to be able to rotate while, waiting for the result. And as Giles mentioned, we don't know when it's going to be called. So we are actually telling all the video team will stay at least a week in the state, and then we will just see how it goes.
Pedro, same applies, obviously.
Same applies, of course. I mean, VJs, photographers, and reporters on the ground, they have, they have been offered, all of them, security webinars. We're checking with them in terms of their equipment, and of course the safety the safety guidelines are always, reminded. So. Yeah, we have also part of the people that we are bringing from abroad are actually quite, senior photographers covering conflict, for example. So we know that at some point we have the flexibility to basically send them to different places if that's the case. If we see that in certain place something happens and people is not fully experienced on that, we have the resources to basically put other more experienced journalists there.
Yeah. Giles, there's one other thought I had with it. As things are moving extremely fast, we're getting closer to the result. You know, they're coming in, things are developing all the time. There's this very tight focus on something happening here, something happening there. At the same time, I think there's a recognition that this election, like other US elections, is actually decided by an extraordinarily small number of people sometimes. And that needs to be explained, doesn't it? Because we're talking about a huge nation with hundreds of millions of potential voters, but actually it boils down to that. How easy do you find it, and how much time do you commit to contextualizing all that and making it understandable at the same time as you're going at 100 miles an hour, keeping up on the results coming in?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. It's something that's not necessarily that well understood, exactly how the electoral college system works here. As we know, in the past, there are candidates who have won the popular vote, but have lost the election by a landslide because of the electoral college system. I think what we do is we do it in two ways. Because we're often in the battleground states, when we are there, we have to explain why we're there and why these places are important. The statistics are pretty incredible. I mean, I think you get different reads on it. Some people say that the number of people who will decide this election could fit into a football stadium. Essentially, 99.5% of the entire electorate is considered as not deciding anything, because they always know which way they're going to vote, Republican or Democrat, or they live in a state where the result is known what it's going to be. It's a foregone conclusion. So that's why the candidates and why we are concentrating everything on this very tiny, minuscule number who, A, definitely will vote, B, have not yet decided which way they will vote, and C, live in one of these 7 states where the margins are very, very tight. So what we do is, as well as contextualizing it in the stories when we're in those states, we put out regular fact boxes and explainers. We explain the electoral college system, how that works. We explain why there is such a small number of people who would in the end have an outsized say in what happens. And then we explain how the candidates are targeting those people specifically. This is a very, very focused campaign. It's very sophisticated. It uses AI, it uses logarithms to just simply hone in with incredible accuracy on this very small number of people. And that's something else I think that we need to contextualize and explain. Plus the vast amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars. I mean, I can't even imagine what the per capita spend is if you work out how many of these people there are that they're trying to reach, but it's enormous.
Yeah, I think Kamala Harris's campaign has hit $1 billion in terms of funds raised. I mean, that is just staggering numbers, isn't it? Which, again, another aspect that you need to reflect on. Can I just say one other thing that has struck me in the course of us all talking here, which says a lot about the sort of patchwork nature of the United States as well. We have Salima Belhadj, we have Pedro Ugarte, and we have Giles Hewitt. You're reflecting, in a way, a part of the United States. And again, you've got to also reflect there are so many different issues on what an American would be voting for and about. And Salima, I guess you're looking to find ways of covering a Hispanic element, for example, or perhaps from another perspective. That is as important as the big picture of who's going to win.
Yeah, especially in this country, and also we are not Americans, so that's why also we have this vision from outside. But we understand that this country is based on communities, so it's also important when we cover. And for example, also when we do a Vox Pop, we are trying to have like the diversity of the US within all the quotes that we provide to the clients. And also, so currently we have mission in Arizona, Nevada, and for example, we are trying to have a story on the vote of Native American. that are far from polling station, and some of them will have to drive 3 hours to be able to reach a polling station. So how the community is trying to organize things for election day. We are going to meet the African American in Georgia. So yeah, it's really really important from the US. We understand that when we start working in this country, and definitely it will be one of the main points in our coverage of election day and weeks maybe.
Pedro?
Yes, I mean, same applies as photo. We're trying to basically put people on the ground on these big, important communities. We, as mentioned before, are having, a couple of photographers coming from abroad to try to work on those specific stories, for example, in the border, which are a little bit more of access, or in places like Georgia, in North Carolina, the places affected by the hurricane, which will be also, quite an important issue during these elections. So yeah, that's the way we are trying to approach it. We are trying to be to have a coverage as diverse as possible, by basically using both our local, network as well as the experience and the eye of our foreign journalists coming.
There is one other element with Giles, which you'll be obviously delighted that is not, strictly speaking, your problem. But AFP covers the world, and there will be a world response to this story. So beyond the bounds of what you have to do, you have an agency providing context and response and reaction from every world leader, from every other aspect that could come into play.
Absolutely. So what we've done already, I mean, we're already working on that. We will be putting out a series of stories before the election even happens. And they will be from places like Brussels, where there's big concerns from NATO, for example, about what the result could mean. Obviously from Kyiv and Moscow, the whole Ukrainian war and what the result, the outcome would have, the impact it would have on that. From Beijing, from China, there's already huge issues at stake over tariffs, and whoever wins will have a big difference in terms of US alliances in Asia, etc. So we've asked across the region for people to chip in, but it's particularly those countries and regions that we know will be particularly affected by the outcome of the election, and that will then carry on into when the result actually happens. We'll have to sort of repeat and go over all of that this time with a clear idea of exactly what the choice has been, rather than what it might be. But yes, it's a huge part of the election, and it's one, of course, that we do from here from Washington as well. So we have State Department foreign policy experts who are going to look into that whole area of what it means for the rest of the world afterwards.
I think you've given us, the three of you, a really good sense of the scope, the reach, the readiness that you are bringing to this massive story. I've been weaving in some of the questions that have been coming my way in the process. So I'm just going to close this really by asking you each, and I hadn't sort of pre-warned you on this, but don't worry, it's not too challenging. What are you most looking forward to about the next few weeks, about this build up to election day? And Salima, don't say the moment that it's over.
I was about to say that.
I was going
to say that.
Logistically, the challenge is massive, isn't it?
No, I think I'm looking forward to have more access to our American families. As we are currently in mission across the country, I really hope that we'll have time to spend time with them. I mean, some mission are ongoing, some mission we are trying to settle, and I think for me this is one of the most important things, and being able to provide as insight of what Americans family are thinking about the day before the election.
Interesting. Pedro, how about you?
I think it's quite similar, but I think I'm looking forward to, at the very end of this election, to have a body of work in which we can really represent in pictures, what was at stake, what happened, and basically, to show what the end result of this election was in pictures, good, solid, compelling document of this historic moment.
You're editor-in-chief, Giles, so you've got to use the word multimedia here, of course. But I just wonder, what's your big lookout?
I think I'm going to give a rather boring answer. To be honest, I'm most looking forward to Election Day. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, and it's going to be a historic moment. It's quite a privilege to be able to cover an event like this, and we have a team that is so committed to it, and it's exhausting, it's tense, it's concerning for some people, I think, but that all comes together on Election Day, and it's great to watch people when they get their teeth into a story like this and they don't want to let it go, but hopefully they won't have to hold on to it for weeks.
Well,
Just
yeah,
can I
Salima.
just add something just to show you how this country is always a step forward? As we are not even on election day, this week we are going to attend a walkthrough for inauguration ceremony in January. So even though we don't know who is going to be the president, we have to be prepared for that also. So
Time never stands still, does it? Look, thank you so much for bringing us this whole panoply of the effort that AFP is putting into this election and the way in which you're going to cover it. Sounds fascinating. Whatever happens, you are covering one great moment of history in our modern times. So best of luck to you all, and thanks so much for giving us your time for this.
Thank you very much.
I hope you found it useful, and of course, follow AFP as they take you on that journey. Bye for now.
Thank you, David.